Good evening, and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of Amnesia. Today is November 6th, 2015. And before I show the short clip, I'd like to give you a little bit of background on it. I've got a 5-minute clip I want to show you. It's about Yemen. We don't hear a lot about Yemen in the news. But there is a war going on. The Saudis are really causing a lot of damage. Thousands of people dying. They're doing an intense bombing campaign in Yemen to basically destroy the infrastructure and destroy the country as a viable entity. And this short 5-minute clip gives you a good alternative view by a very conscientious citizen journalist. His name is Caleb Mopin, and he has actually gone to Yemen. He has gone to Iran. He's been there and seen it with his own eyes, and he relates to a group called Moratorium Now out of Detroit. Apparently he's based in Detroit. Moratorium Now, we won't go into a lot of details about that, but it's an organization that is attempting to prevent the city of Detroit from furthering the agenda of clearing the poor people essentially out of Detroit. And what they're doing is they're shutting off their water, shutting off their heat, and doing anything they can because they want to build that new Detroit that they have envisioned and planned for the future. Detroit is meant to be a model city in the future. Right now, except for the small area right in the downtown where the Renaissance Center, the RenCen, in the downtown area, you have a derelict war zone that looks like something out of a dystopian science fiction movie surrounding in many areas that downtown area. And that's all supposed to be cleared out. A lot of it has been cleared out. Thousands of homes have been destroyed in Detroit, and those are going to be permanent green spaces and with clusters of tightly surveilled futuristic apartment buildings. There'll be condos or apartments very tightly clustered with green space around them. This is the vision that the planners have for the future. But that's sort of another issue, really. So let's go ahead and look at the 5-minute clip, which is basically just audio about what's going on in Yemen. Very important, very timely.
Well, just real quick, you know, the big news has been that on the stock market, things are going crazy right now, right? Well, one of the big factors in that is that the price of oil is the lowest it's been in decades. It's a really low price of oil. Well, why is the price of oil so low? It's low because there's so much oil, right? The corporations, the oil companies, that's connected to all the big banks, right? You know, J.P. Morgan, that's an oil company. You know, all the big banks are connected to oil companies, and they've gotten so good at sucking the oil out of the ground that there's so much oil on the market that the price of oil is lower than it's ever been, and it's causing all these economic problems. Now that doesn't make any sense. Why are we having economic problems? Because there's too much of something, not too little, right? That's not rational, but that's the way this system works when you have people trying to make money off of commodities. And if you can understand that, you can understand what's happening in Yemen right now. Yemen for a long time was a dictatorship, and it was backed up by the U.S. They had a dictator supported by the U.S. and supported by Saudi Arabia. But the people in Yemen, they don't want a dictatorship anymore. They want democracy. They want to control their own country. So they've risen up, they're having a revolution, and they're fighting to control their country. And the United States, it's basically the U.S. military that's attacking Yemen. I mean, they call it the Saudi military, but every airplane they have is sold to them by the U.S. government. The U.S. Pentagon generals are in Saudi Arabia directing them, and the satellites, the U.S. military satellites, are telling them where to bomb. I mean, this is a U.S. attack on Yemen. And you wouldn't know anything about it. If you turn on, you know, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, they don't say Yemen at all. But all around the clock, Yemen is being bombed and destroyed. Over 5,000 people are already dead. There are 3 million people that have become refugees. It's a crisis. Now they're talking about a food crisis in Yemen. They're trying to starve the people because they're trying to fight for their independence. And it's a humanitarian crisis, and the reason it's related to the oil prices is because Yemen has a huge amount of oil that's untapped. And the Saudi government, backed by the U.S. government, they know if the Yemenis had their independence, they could do what Iran has done, they could do what Venezuela has done, and they could use public control of those resources to develop their economy and have an independent economy. And they don't want that because that would make the price of oil go down even further. So basically, to keep oil prices high, people are dying right now in Yemen. People are being killed so that Wall Street can keep control of that country and they can't have their independence. It's horrendous. Now, I was in Iran, and I got on a ship. We were in Bandar Abbas, and a port in southern Iran. We got on a ship. There were 2,500 tons of water and medical supplies, and we tried to go to Yemen. And we were on our way to Yemen, and the day we were supposed to arrive, May 14th, the Saudi military, again with U.S. military equipment, bombed the port we were going to. They bombed it not once, not twice, but 8 times in a single day. And then 2 days later, they bombed the medical university in Hodeidah, the city. They bombed that medical university, and they killed 12 medical students who were just studying to be doctors and nurses. And I mean, this war is a horrendous war, but you'd never know it was going on, right? It's a crime, and it's absolutely connected to what's going on in this city because it's the same bankers that run the same oil corporations, right? We're at a point where we have this system based on profits, where people are trying to make money, right? We don't have houses in this country because people need shelter. We have houses so landlords and bankers can make money off of it. We don't have schools in this system because the kids need to learn. We have schools because the kids need to be taught how to be workers and obey their bosses. We don't have food so people can eat it. We have food so that agribusiness can make money off of it. And when you have a system that's that crazy, things like this happen, whether it's people losing their homes, not having access to water, or whether it's these horrendous wars where people are dying in their millions, right? So there's a war going on in Yemen right now, and we have to raise awareness about it. We have to show people how it's connected, and that's my message. I was on a ship, and I tell you, these doctors that I was on the ship with, these were some of the bravest people I've ever met. They've gone to every corner of the world, risked their lives to help people who are in need. And when I was in Iran, I'll tell you, in Iran, public education, they have free college for anyone who can pass the entrance exam. And 60% of the people that are studying at the universities are women, by the way. Next time they're lecturing you about you have to hate Iran because of women's rights, 60% of the people in college getting a free education are women. And why do they have these resources? Because in Iran, unlike here in the U.S., the oil is in the hands of the people. The oil is nationalized. It's under the control of the people. That's what happened as a result of the revolution that they have. It's an independent country. And that's why there's sanctions. That's why they're always threatening war against Iran, is because it's established its independence and taken control of its own natural resources. It has an independent economy. So that's real brief. I know this is a very important meeting, and I just wanted to share with you what's happening in Yemen and how it's all connected. And think about, as you're fighting the banks here in Detroit, think about how you're part of a global struggle, because these bankers, here in Wall Street, whether in Wall Street or in London, they're destroying the whole world, and people all over the world are doing exactly what the people in this room are doing and trying to fight against them and build a whole new world.
Okay, so to me, this is really interesting stuff, and it gives you a perspective that you don't see or hear on NPR or MSNBC or CNN. And, unfortunately, this is the situation that we live in, that Americans are unable to really grasp the power, the globe-spanning power of the U.S. empire, and how we have the vassal states, we have the allies, and that Saudi Arabia is very much involved with the United States in the criminality. And we know that the Saudi monarchy is essentially a criminal organization. These are like a mafia family that is a dynasty, and the Saudis, that's why they call it Saudi Arabia, not just Arabia. It used to be just Arabia. Now it's Saudi Arabia. That's because the House of Saud, they were handed the reins of power. They were given the money. They were given the access to the tools to reign over Arabia. They were the ones. They know who feeds the hand. They're not about to bite the hand that feeds them. And the deals were made when the oil was found, the natural resources, the black gold. This is after after the end of the First World War, when the struggle was on between the two empires for the control of the natural resources in Europe and in the Middle East. Remember, although we think of the First World War happening in Europe, it was also, it was called a world war for a reason. It was also going on in the Sinai Peninsula, in the Middle East, in the Arab states that were very primitive at that time. And it took people like Lawrence of Arabia, who was a British agent, to bring those people in on the side of the Allies, to give them the weapons, to give them the training, to help them to achieve their independence. And their independence was really just the allegiance shifting from one empire to another empire. And so when this citizen journalist describes the attempts by the citizens of a country like Yemen to gain true independence and access to their own natural resources so they can reap the benefits, what he's doing is striking a chord, and it has the ring of truth, because this is something we have seen over and over happen in countries that make that attempt to break free and achieve true independence from the various empires that are fighting over them. And this we see, this is something that, it's an age-old story, thousands of years old. Nothing new here, folks. But what is new is that people no longer really understand, to a large extent, what is truly going on. It used to be that Americans understood that, yes, the danger of falling under the power of a ruthless group of criminals who call themselves an empire, or the leadership of an empire, that is always a danger. People understood that at that time. What's different now is that most people do not understand that these age-old dynamics are still operating. You know, there was even a time period right after the fall of the Soviet Union that some historians actually sort of rolled out this new idea that history was over, the end of history. There was even a book called The End of History. And that, I don't know what they expected to happen, but it was like, hello, that's not true. How could that happen? How could that be true? There is no end to history. History continues to happen. As long as human beings exist, there will be history. But they wanted to make a statement that everything was going to be different, and there was now a turning point in the way the world operates. No, there is no turning point. This was like trying to fool people back around the turn of the century and up until around 2008, saying that the old boom and bust economy system was no longer in operation and that things were just going to get better and better. No, that's not true. Whatever comes up must come down. That is like as immutable as the law of physics in the created universe that we live in. As long as we operate under those laws, what goes up must come down. The U.S., just like the stock market. The stock market goes up, the stock market goes down. Stock market goes back up again. The manipulation of the stock market can only work for so long. Eventually, the fall, the crash will come. And sometimes the manipulation of the stock market actually, it may delay the crash, but when the crash eventually happens, it will be that much more precipitous of a crash because of that delay. Because you can only prop up prices and the value of assets for so long. Once people lose confidence that the value of assets is what it's touted to be, then they panic, they withdraw their funds, and they pull out the props that keep the assets value high because they realize that it is an illusion and always has been an illusion. Much of our reality that we take for granted, all too often take for granted, is mere fantasy, mere smoke and mirrors, dog and pony show, whatever metaphor you want to use. It has been ginned up, it has been hyped. It's about perception. It's the old watchword in Washington and other places. Reality is perception. What you perceive to be real is real. It doesn't make it real, but it certainly serves as a reasonable facsimile of reality for a while. The nature of truth, though, is that it will eventually emerge. I think it was Mark Twain who said, a lie goes around the world before the truth gets his pants on. And in other words, so yeah, that's the the lie is something that people maybe can accept because it's been engineered to be acceptable. And it seems like the truth, and people accept it as the truth because it answers to their expectations. All the requirements that live up to their preconceived notions are there for them to see, and so from a superficial examination from all sides without really looking into it or tearing it open to see what's inside that lie, then it's perceived as truth. Whereas sometimes the truth may not stand up to a cursory inspection, and it may seem to not fit with our expectations, not at all what our expectations were. It may seem improbable. I think it was Arthur Conan Doyle who had Sherlock Holmes say, after the impossible has been ruled out, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. And although this was written for a fictional character, Sherlock Holmes, I think there is truth in that statement, and I really, I remember that once in a while when I'm trying to get to the truth of a matter. And I think this is what we have to do as human beings. We always have to search for truth. And I think it's our primary purpose on the planet. I mean, you might say, well, you know, our primary purpose is to keep the species alive, reproduce. Okay, but for what? For what? Why? I mean, what is the purpose of reproducing, keeping the species going? That's perpetuating the cluelessness of existence without understanding why. But if we consider that truth might exist, and it's a shining, self-effervescent, self-effulgent beacon toward some goal that is higher and better and purer and beautiful, then you suddenly see that this is all worth it. It suddenly makes sense. So we can't settle for the prepackaged truths. We can't just say, well, okay, this is my set of beliefs, and I'm satisfied with that. No, beliefs are not enough. Faith is not enough. We really need to discover for ourselves. We need to set aside our notions, our preconceptions, our brainwashing, if you will, the propaganda that masks as truth. We need to be able to see through that. We need to be detectives like Sherlock Holmes and always searching for the anomaly, for that piece of the structure that suddenly you realize, well, look, wait, this is impossible. There's no possible way that this belief system that I have accepted could be true because of this reason, because of that reason, because this is clearly not possible. And then when you find out, when you pull that aspect of it, which is impossible, out, then the whole thing collapses. And and it's revealed as a construct, as an artificial construct that has been created for the purpose of deception. And why? Why would someone do that? Why would someone go to such work, why would they work so hard to create a deception? For many reasons. For one thing, many people are very simply just paid to do this. And they're part of a larger machine. They're part of an effort that is originates from the very highest levels of government, or even above the level of government, to the controllers who control the governments. And they are a small group of men who, maybe a few women, but women are also men, really. Men are just one side of the coin. Women are the other side of the coin, but they're all the same. They're all the same. And slightly different. And so you have human beings, and you have a very, very small group of human beings who are working very hard to perpetuate what a deception that will allow them to continue on in the status quo, or even to increase their dream, to create their dream. They have a dream. And their dream is a legacy. That their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren will continue what they have created. And this gives them purpose. This gives them a powerful motivation to do whatever is necessary to maintain their position in society and increase it. And this is the old aristocracy, and they may not have titles, and their credentials may be actually, that bank statement, that bottom line bank statement. Like someone like Donald Trump, who's worth, according to his own words, around $10 billion. He's a real estate mogul. He has casinos, he has hotels, he's playing Monopoly on a global scale. And and he's vying to be the candidate for president. So he's playing the game. He's always been a player. He's been around for quite a long time. And he is a showman as well. He happens to be a showman, an entertainer. And he's vying for the presidency. And so far, he's right up there on the top. And as much as I feel that, you know, this is all another circus, another example of American politics, I have to say, well, at least the Republicans have a huge number of candidates that have thrown their hat into the ring, and they're willing to play the game and go along with it. The Democrats don't even have that. They basically have Hillary and Bernie Sanders. Without Bernie Sanders, there would be it would be like a vast desert. And whether or not it will be a fight between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, I don't know. I don't think Bernie Sanders has much chance, and I don't frankly think Donald Trump has much chance either, even though he's still the front runner. Right now, everybody's making fun of Jeb Bush, but it could be that 6 months down the road, Jeb Bush's fortunes will be turned around. He will be magically elevated to the candidacy for president, and that would be a sad day. But I don't see any viable options for the presidency that would actually have the power to turn this situation around that the United States finds itself in. I can't see any of it. I was just reading that the Republican candidates, the major candidates, they want intervention, military intervention. They want it in Syria. They're for it. They want it in Libya. I guess Yemen as well, and several other countries. So they're going to be following somebody like Trump even. They're going to be following in the footsteps of their predecessors, fighting Al-Qaeda, fighting ISIS, fighting these, whichever group, you know, whatever they call themselves, the Muslims. The war on terrorism will continue under these presidents. The only possible way that this could turn around would be indictments. That the criminality in the U.S. government would be exposed, and the American people would demand indictments. Just, for instance, the criminality of the intervention in Syria that just happened by the U.S. government under the direct command of Barack Obama. That alone is against international law and U.S. law. He has intervened in Syria without consulting Congress and without gaining that resolution for an intervention that is required. And this is a minimal standard to ask of a U.S. president, that he go to the Congress first and ask for the consent of the Congress to do what is essentially an illegal invasion of a sovereign nation, and to actually work against, to overthrow. I mean, to overthrow a sovereign nation, that is illegal. You're not allowed to do that under international law, under U.S. law. UN specifically considers this a crime against humanity, a war crime. So Obama is just as guilty as George W. Bush was. He has followed in the footsteps of the criminal George W. Bush. he has furthered the agenda. He has protected the war criminals like Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and the neocons. None of them are indicted. None of them are in prison for lying. I mean, you cannot lie to the American people over and over and over and not have repercussions, except in this country. And in other, and yeah, obviously in other countries, dictatorships, they lie. But the only possible way would be indictments to turn this thing around. That's really what it comes down to. It doesn't matter who we elect. They will be forced, even if they didn't want to follow the agenda, to help to create the legacy for the elite few at the very top of the global pyramid. Even if they resisted, they would be unable to turn this thing around, because it has now been tacitly acknowledged that those at the very top, our elected officials, our appointed officials, are essentially above the law. There was a reason why, for instance, Clinton was impeached and found innocent for a sexual misconduct. That's because it's that type of thing which is not a threat to the establishment, to the status quo. His political enemies wanted to use that, and that alone, because it was not as serious as the actual crimes of Clinton, the war crimes, the crimes against humanity. You could say, well, what war crimes? Well, intervention in the Balkans by Clinton back in the 90s, for one thing. That's just one thing. His turning a blind eye, to say the very least, to the criminality back in the 80s when he was governor of Arkansas, at Mena, Arkansas, with the Iran-Contra connection to Arkansas while he was governor. And there's no possible way that he could not have known that the CIA was operating a huge black op out of Mena, Arkansas during the 80s. They were running guns to the Contras in Nicaragua, and then on the way back, the planes were making a stop-off and picking up at, I can't remember where, but somewhere in Central America, and they were picking up the drugs and they were bringing them back to Mena to be unloaded. So you didn't have the plane flying back empty. And also, the CIA, we know, has been involved in drug running and arms running, gun running, since at least the 60s. And this funds their operations, the black ops, the illegal operations. And it enriches those at the very top and those military officers, just like we saw it happening in Vietnam, just like, we're seeing it in Afghanistan. These are major felonies. I mean, the criminal justice has these crimes laid out, and there are. I mean, somebody like Hillary Clinton has already committed multiple felonies. I mean, every time that she obstructs the ability of the Justice Department or the committees, who, are getting the subpoena, who are trying to find out what she was up to, every time she obstructs that, that's a felony. You can go to jail for that for years. And yet, she knows that nothing will happen. She is above the law. And as long as our elected and appointed officials are above the law, nothing will change. And, you know, sometimes they throw someone to the wolves like they did to Clinton, you know, on this relatively minor Monica Lewinsky affair. I mean, he must have been doing something wrong for them to have used this. But it's also, of course, a really good distraction. I remember that episode was approximately 1 year long. And it was on the news 24/7, daily, month after month, for a year. And then at one point, all of a sudden, boom, it was gone, just like that. Monica Lewinsky just vanished off the radar. She didn't surface. She really hasn't ever surfaced, but she has surfaced a little bit over the last few years, and there's been some interviews, and she's doing some business things, and, you know, taking advantage of her celebrity notoriety a little bit. But we see evidence of engineering, of manipulation daily in the news. Just, what was it, a day or two ago, ExxonMobil is supposedly caught lying to its shareholders about climate change. I heard this on NPR, and there was an article in the New York Times about it. Okay, so for years and years, since the 70s, I think they said, since the 70s, according to NPR and the New York Times, ExxonMobil did research that fossil fuels contributed to climate change. Okay? And they would tell their stockholders about this. But then, in the last 20 years or 15 years, they changed their tune and they started to say that there was no effect on the climate as a result of the burning of fossil fuels. And this is what they were telling their shareholders, their stockholders. And so so there's an investigation which has been initiated to see if they can get in trouble for lying to their stockholders. Hello? Since when has it been illegal for a company to lie about anything? Now, they immediately drew the connection between the oil, what's happening with the ExxonMobil, and the tobacco companies. They wanted to draw that together. They're saying this is the same thing as the tobacco companies, knowing that cigarettes cause cancer, but telling everybody that they do not, and even though they had the information all along. So you see how clever this is. Climate change and that cancer is caused by cigarettes, I do not think are quite the same thing. Because they say that the scientists have reached a consensus about climate change. Yes, humans cause climate change. Period. End of story. Consensus. Consensus means essentially everyone agrees. But that itself is not true. I mean, I was just reading an article, this was also in mainstream media, about the new information that's coming out about climate change, and they're saying that the scientists are now, who are looking at this, and it was a report in the Meteorological Society, that's weather, these are weathermen, and they're saying that maybe 50% think that humans affect the climate, human interaction or human activity on planet Earth affects the climate, and about 50% think that they don't, that human interaction or burning of fossil fuels essentially do not affect the climate. 50%. That is amazing, because it's not how much do humans affect the climate, but whether or not you believe they affect the climate. Because this is crucial. This is crucial to know, okay, humans affect the climate, but how much? What percent of climate change is caused by human activity? You can't just say that we have to initiate carbon taxes and we need a huge infrastructure built so that every human being on the planet's carbon footprint can be mapped, can be regulated, or can be traced. So because how are you going to tax carbon, the emission of carbon by each human, without an elaborate structure to trace everything that we do, that every human being does? Because a carbon footprint is what you eat, what you buy, what kind of car you drive, how much you drive it, the kind of how many clothes you wear, everything that you do, farting and coughing. I mean, if you really wanted to go to it, all emits carbon dioxide. I mean, did you have a barbecue in your backyard? Did you light a fire? How many fires did you light? How much smoke came out of that fire? You know, how much do you drive, how many miles do you drive to work? Or just drive around, whatever. You know, when was the last time you went on an airplane? And you see how insane this gets. Your carbon footprint. If this were the case, you could see the amount of the extent of the surveillance that would be required just for that alone, to discover that information about each human being. Just that alone, in order to figure out in a fair way how much each person will pay in carbon taxes. And what would be the point of that, for one thing? What would be the point of paying, okay, they say, well, see, we take that money and we use it to offset the amount of carbon dioxide. Well, how would you do that? You could plant trees. See, trees, they love carbon dioxide. All plants love carbon dioxide. They couldn't exist without it. In fact, the more carbon dioxide, the more they thrive. So the idea that high levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere actually causes desertification, I don't buy that. Because plants love it and they grow. Plants don't just need water. They need sunlight and they need carbon dioxide and minerals out of the soil. Different things. Not just one thing. Not just water. Not just sunlight. But so you have this question that's never ending, never answered. It's never answered. No one, I think people are almost afraid to ask the question, how much, if humans are causing climate change by the burning of fossil fuels, how much are they responsible? 100%? 50%, 75%, 25%, 10%, 5%, 2%, 1%, 1/10 of 1%? This is important to know, because if it's only 1% or 5% even 10%. That means that if you extract trillions of dollars in carbon taxes from the global population, and you get that let's say that amount of human influenced climate change down from 10% to 5%, that's still only 5%. That means the rest of the climate change is going to go on unabated and unaffected because it's not caused by humans. It's the Earth and the planet is just going to go on its merry way. The sun is going to continue to shine. The sun is going to be emitting, enormous bursts of plasma, of superheated radioactive plasma that will be hitting the Earth, but deflected by the system, by the magnetic field that keeps us alive, or maybe the sun will, it'll be quieter. You won't see very many sunspots. The more sunspots you see on the sun, the more the planet heats up. Because each one of those spots, that's an enormous burst of heat. That's a huge storm. That's enormous roiling of power and energy, just beyond imagination power. And so when it calms down a little bit, you see that fewer or no sunspots. Then you get cold winters, the planet cools. The sun, you talk to any astronomer, anybody who studies the sun, they will tell you that the sun is the big dog in the solar system. The humans are not. We are not the big dogs. The Earth is a pretty big dog too. It's not the biggest dog, not by any means, not even close. But the Earth itself also has something to say when it comes to climate change. And that would be volcanic activity, for one thing. You have this molten core. I don't know what they teach kids in school anymore. I do know about the powerful forces in the environment. I mean, you have this molten center. I mean, I don't know, maybe they teach the hollow earth theory as one viable option. Oh, maybe the Earth's hollow, Or maybe it's flat. Maybe or maybe, created 6,000 years ago. Who knows? But my understanding is that molten core causes tectonic plates to move. They're floating on this molten core that's really hot. And I used to think that the lava out of a volcano, okay, that was spurting out from the molten core. But my understanding is that no, the volcanic vents don't go all the way down, but it's just the friction of the tectonic plates moving that causes so much heat that it melts the rock and creates the lava that we see spewing out of a volcano. And so that is amazing. Those forces are just so powerful that we think that cars are doing it, that China burning coal is doing it. Well, if anybody was, it would be China. I just read an article that China is actually burning 17% more coal annually than they have admitted. And of course they don't use scrubbers, they don't have any environmental controls. It's a wide open industrial machine that's going full tilt year-round with millions of Chinese working for practically slave wages, with suicide nets to keep them from killing themselves, with long hours, churning out these products, making enormous fortunes for a very small group of well-connected, maybe very intelligent entrepreneurs in China, who know how to take advantage of the system, that is the communist system in China that's allowing these capitalists to create these vast fortunes. Yeah, so I mean, no wonder this article said, the atmosphere and the water is so polluted in China. Well, hello, the winds, the prevailing winds are from west to east, so that toxic air is being blown across the Pacific to the United States. So we're downwind, and so we have to deal with the pollution that is happening as a result of the Chinese factories. And this has got to be affecting the health of Americans. Yeah, you almost have to understand where the super elite, the super wealthy, are coming from when they inscribe in the very first line of the Georgia Guidestones that they will ensure that the population of the planet is reduced or maintained at 500 million. That's their goal. Reduce the population of the planet to 500 million. I mean, there are something like 380 million, 300 legal residents of the United States and maybe 80 million illegal. That's a number I've heard recently. The U.S. government claims not to know how many illegals there are, but they keep pouring in. And of course, a lot of illegals in Europe now too. Millions are coming. Millions are there now. Millions more are coming. No one knows what to do. Some of the countries are either shut off their borders or contemplating shutting off their borders. This is all part of climate change. It's a climate of fear that is being endorsed and promulgated and used to keep people on edge and worried. And all we have to do is turn in our guns and everything will be okay, because there won't be any more crime, because no one will have guns to commit crime. So, and our government is working very hard to make that happen. And unfortunately, whenever a shooting happens, people feel that, you know what, I need a gun. I need to go get one, because what am I going to do if someone tries, to come in, they come into my office, they start shooting the place up. Am I just going to have to sit there and get shot, or am I going to be able to shoot back? And this is the American mindset all too often. So they have these gun-free zones. This shooting that happened in Oregon recently, which many people think actually never happened, and there's a reason for that, why they think that. That was a gun-free zone. And so they're thinking, well, maybe we should rethink this idea, because I would feel safer if I knew that some of the kids in my class were packing, concealed carry, or open carry for that matter. In fact, open carry is actually getting more and more popular. I mean, I'm beginning to see it in people on the street. It's happening in Israel. It's happening in Austria. Open carry. Women are getting raped by the illegals who are coming into Austria and other places, and the guns are flying off the shelves. Now they can't get handguns there, so the women are buying rifles and shotguns. That's probably all that's available in a place like Austria. Because, I mean, if you were a woman, I mean, for some women they would just go like, well, there's nothing I could do about it. I'm just not going to do anything. I'll just call the police if I get raped. Other women, hell no, I'm not going to get raped. I'm going to have a gun. I'm going to protect myself. That's their mindset. Go figure. But this is very often the case. So what is the plan, at the very, very highest levels? Is it working? Is the plan working? I don't know. I think in some places it's working, in other places it isn't working. It's going the opposite direction. We do know somebody like David Rockefeller. Apparently he's had like 6 heart transplants. He's in his 90s. He's trying to stay alive for some reason. I mean, why? I thought it was all about the legacy, about, passing your wealth onto your kids, keeping the Rockefeller family going. Well, there are other younger Rockefellers waiting to take over the reins of the family. I don't think that David Rockefeller is going to be around long enough to get eternal life, which is what they're all hoping for ultimately. So that's all for today. Have a great weekend and sleep well, friends.